Hello, folks. I am Nick, and this is Casciotti News. Welcome back to this three-topic episodes that you're going to see here today with three wonderful guests. We have a Republican, a Democrat, and a Libertarian today. So let's hear from them. Our first topic, Trump's last day in office, Sydney, was a very different departure than we've seen in a very long time. What did Trump leave us with, and what did we see from Joe Biden so far?
Yeah, I think Trump's last day in office was definitely a very, very different note than I think we've seen from any other president in the past. Some of his actions definitely reflected the state of defiance that he's held over the past few months, especially, with the election results. And he did choose to forego most of the transitionary traditions between the leaving admin and the incoming one, like opting for a recorded speech instead of a final public speech. Um, he did reach across to the newest administration in that speech and, wish goodwill, but he never mentioned Biden directly by name. Uh, and he pardoned 143 individuals on his final day. Some of those including Steve Bannon, uh, you know, rapper Lil Wayne, rapper Kodak Black. Some of those little like public throws. Um, but I think that my primary takeaway of what the Trump administration has left us with over the past 4 years is just an overwhelming sense of division. I don't think, at least in my lifetime, I've never seen this country, as divided as it is right now. Um, he managed to radicalize his base of supporters so intensely that many of them cannot fathom the idea of, even considering the other viewpoint. I've seen family members and friends just decide they don't want to talk to each other anymore, because of, the extreme radicalization that's gone on with the Republican Party with Trump. And, claiming before the election that the results would be fraudulent, without any proof that, that could even happen. And perpetuating that lie after the fact that the election was stolen and instructing his base to believe the same, not really having any um, basis, to make such claims. And I believe that is crucial, or that it was crucial to our nation after the results of the election were projected, that he set an example of unity and togetherness for the nation and accepted the results to set a precedent for the nation to move on together. And I think that it was just really disappointing that he couldn't manage to do that. And on, I would say, the juxtaposition in the past couple of days that we've seen from Biden so far, is we've seen him reaching across the aisle. We've seen him calling for unity and healing from all the loss that the nation's experienced in the past year. Over 408,000 people dead from COVID. And, the nation is in need for a time of healing and need for a time of togetherness. And
I
we've seen
understand.
clear plans laid out that, Biden wants to initiate that.
So, Jacob, to that point, Trump leaving us with 400,000 folks that passed due to COVID, and Joe Biden with this message of unity. What are we left with? What are the resonating factors of the Trump presidency, and what are we looking at moving forward? What's that roadmap with Biden?
Basically, the way I see it is that this is just proof in the pudding that the presidency has way too much influence on our country. It's become so hyperly focused and involved in our daily lives that it's almost to the point where I've seen people deify this position, which I am totally against. Having no checks and balances, executive orders, and all of these things that we see that were utilized by the Trump administration. They were utilized by Obama. I mean, how far back can we see how much actual power has gone to the top? That's not what this nation's about. That's not what we're ever intended to be about. I would like it to be like my great grandparents were, or my great great grandparents were, where they barely even heard of the president. And then they would know at a certain time, and they'd go, oh, I'd vote for this way or that way. There's way too much in my assessment, where it's infiltrated our lives. And then that's when totalitarianism comes into play, or a dictatorship, or top heavy power. And even people within my groups and outside of the libertarian concept or political party, we're seeing them get sick of it too. Juxtaposition with Joe Biden, we can already see which direction he's going, and completing that narrative of where they're making the decisions for us, and they're making decisions for me and my doctor. They're making decisions, and that needs to stop. The only way that I feel like our country is any way, shape, or form going to see any calming down is when we stop looking to other people to define A, what's good for us, B, what we should put into our body, C, politicizing a virus. And I've heard it many times where they're like, oh, yeah, they come out, and this is going to kind of segue later on. I'll say this a little bit more, but no matter what news station you go on, you are seeing, whether it's even online, whether it's Google, whether it's anything, you're seeing it politicized, even though they're saying they're not politicizing it, but they keep talking about it. And then what is Joe Biden going to do? What did Trump do wrong? No. This is all wrong. And, and it's fear mongering at its best.
Well, so Jacob, again, I'm non-party affiliated as your host, right? I don't have any party affiliations here. I see the people to the left and to the right of you. You're a libertarian right here. You have an audience who may be comprised of a lot of people that are non-party affiliated. There may be a lot of people that are Democrats, a lot of people who are Republicans. Do you think the libertarian message going forward, based on what we saw from Trump and based on what we've seen so far from Biden, do you think that the libertarians are going to get a lot more votes moving forward because of people not enjoying this hyperpolarization?
Yes. And in fact, I'll make a prediction. 2 months ago, I said Trump will be squeezed out by the GOP and he will start his own political party. Now, my friends think I'm psychic because, well, that's what he's talked about doing now. So, which I like my little crystal ball. It's not really psychic. It's just paying attention to all the moving pieces, right? Which I think ultimately will divide the GOP. I think ultimately, if you take a look at it, even if you have people that didn't want to vote for Biden and just did what I call a political shot in the dark for Trump, if you take a look at how many people voted for Trump, even if you take a quarter of them, there's enough to make the foundations of a very strong political party, which will ultimately destroy the GOP, or at least take away their second place. And we already saw it within, I believe, our national chair and I talked approximately 2 hours after the people, whatever you want to call it, insurgent, whatever rhetoric you want to use, the people that attacked the Capitol or went in there and trespassed and did what they did. We had 800, within an hour, 800 inquiries to the Libertarian Party. So yes, you will see us grow. I'm seeing it on the state level because I'm in leadership in my state party here in Washington. And I'm seeing people reach out to me from the left and right, including ex-representatives of our state. So, I think people are tired of always having to pay attention to what's going on federally. People are tired of the politicization and the divide.
Rocco, moving on from there, really getting back to the main points here. What he brought up is potentially a fractured GOP. What he brings up are points of a very strong Democratic Party now moving into these next 4 years. Is that how you see it?
Well, I think that as far as the question of a fractured GOP goes, we're going to see, I believe, a lot less of that than people think, because there actually isn't much of a non-Trump constituency left within the Republican Party. The extent to which Trump's rhetoric and talking points really dominated the space, really galvanized and unified people, was to a much greater extent, I would say, than what we have ever seen in the past. But, getting back to, I guess, the original question that you had asked of, what did Trump leave us with and what have we seen from Joe Biden so far? I will say that as a Republican, I was a bit disappointed with the specifics of the final days of the Trump presidency. But, we should put it in perspective. Any president's final day, final week in office ultimately is forgotten. We don't remember what Obama did on his last week. We don't remember what Bush did on his last week, and Trump will be forgotten for that as well. The question of what Trump left us with is really, in my view, more about the entirety of his presidency. And there's a number of ways that I would say you can judge that question. I mean, in terms of substance, I would say he's appointed a number of outstanding judges who, as far as my worldview, are going to do a much better job than their predecessors of interpreting the Constitution accurately. I think that he cut a lot of regulation and taxes which need to be eliminated. We got some great Middle East peace deals. And I think that he exposed some people who are, in my view, very rotten people in big tech, people in the national security state, the mainstream media, the establishments of both political parties, who have shown that they are willing to do very horrible things to people in order to get their way politically. And, I don't think there's ultimately a ton that we can say that he left us beyond those things, given that, in my view, he surrendered this country to Fauci and Birx for the last 10 months of his presidency and thus gave away most of his economic record. But I think that one of the lessons of this 4-year period for conservatives is that, even what he was able to do represented some of the best accomplishments of my lifetime of the presidency as a 28-year-old. And just really quickly on Biden, I think that what we've seen from Joe Biden so far has been a very divisive figure who seems hell-bent on making his political opponents cede to the notion that he is now in charge, and that if he doesn't like that, he will come after them. Calling the storming of the Capitol an insurrection is a wild escalation designed to justify Biden's authoritarian response to the American people. He's already talking about domestic terrorism legislation, extremist task forces, and people in Congress are talking about Truth and Reconciliation Commission, trying to tie 75 million people to a few dozen people who are actually violent at the Capitol, not the hundreds of thousands who gathered peacefully, or even the hundreds in the Capitol building itself who mostly just peacefully occupied it. So in my view, this is how you start civil conflict. It's wildly irresponsible, and Joe Biden should be ashamed of himself. Conservatives have every reason to anticipate 4 years of political persecution at the hands of our political opponents, in my view.
Sydney, I'm going to give you 1 minute to respond. We got to move things along.
Well, I'd like to respond a little bit to that, to the last point that you made about the insurrectionists at the Capitol. I mean, personally, I don't like to call them insurrectionists. I like to call them domestic terrorists because, I believe that, well, first of all, I believe that they were trying to impose on, the election process from taking place, the certification of the election results, which by legal definition, all of those people trying to, stop that from happening are committing sedition. And, that's a crime in itself. And, you're saying like only a couple dozen were violent, but, that big like show of force where some of these lawmakers thought that there was a possibility that they could lose their lives that day, that's not peaceful protesting, that's trespassing on government property. And I think that in any context, that's, unacceptable.
Well, we're not here to pick sides, and that's not my job to do so. The Republican point back to you would be we've seen 10 months ago the Black Lives Matter protests and riots far more obtrusive than what we saw here. So I'm not putting words in their mouth. I'm saying I want the argument out of you. So they said that was far more dangerous than what we've seen at the Capitol. Would that be something that you would agree with or you would oppose?
I honestly think that's something I would oppose. I think that there's a difference between, the insurrectionists or domestic terrorists at the Capitol and, people that have been marginalized for hundreds of years, just asking for their voices to be heard because, Black people were being murdered by the police. And, I think that there's a difference between trying to impose on, Congress doing what it's supposed to do and, standing up for like actual violence and like actual marginalization and actual issues. And I think there's a difference between looting a Target and storming the Capitol, the symbol of our nation's democracy.
And what is the difference?
I mean, the difference is that, well, the argument is that, oh, like, looting is wrong, but like you can replace possessions, but you can't put a price on human lives,
Okay. Jacob, how do you respond with your last minute?
Okay. So, first of all, the role of government should be to protect our liberty. It should be, well, I mean, it's written out clearly what the government's there for. It's to protect us and our liberty and our property. So when I hear, and no offense to anyone, that the property that we paid for is or more important than the property of a private citizen, it really, really is hypocritical. The fact that I would even argue were they trespassing, and I would probably argue no. What they did was wrong.
Please define they.
The people that did the went into the state cap or the United States Capitol. Okay, so I would say that what they did was wrong. I believe in non-aggression. I believe in non-violence unless it's purely self-defense. But juxtapositioning that to what Black Lives Matter or whoever takes the blame, Antifa, radical left, whatever we want to politicize and label as, is more wrong, because who is supposed to defend these people? I know personal people in Seattle that have lost their livelihoods, could not get the insurance out in time. They could not recover. And this is a lie. And it frustrates me because I know personal people, friends of mine. So what I'm saying is, no, they're both wrong. Everything about what's going on is wrong. And by the way, I was raised as a white in the minority. My mother was the actual, in Tacoma, Washington, the Black Panther nanny. So I know all about what my friends went through that were Black. I know all about my wife is Mexican. I know about the racism and the ugliness of how police brutality, the brutality over these people just because of their skin color.
So no
doesn't
one is
justify.
doubting your experience, and I don't think
Right.
anybody is doubting your wit and your knowledge, right? To the people that looked at both of those events, that looked at the Capitol and were disgusted, and looked at the Black Lives Matter protests and were disgusted with that, and potentially even the people that were disgusted with the debates. What do all of those then have in common? Is it all Trump? Is that what they all had in common in these past, these past 4 years? Is Joe Biden going to fix that? Are libertarians going to be snuffed out? I mean, those are the bigger questions, Jacob.
Yeah, and here's my question. For the first time, they've kind of grouped us libertarians into terrorists. It was said, I believe, last night on the news. A previous CIA director, John, I always forget his name because
John
he's
Brennan.
worthless. Thank you. What a worthless piece of garbage. You know what? We are the only party that is 100% anti-war, 100% anti-aggression. And for them to lump us in, well, I think it's actually, we might have legal grounds for that. But that said aside, it is equally disgusting to see force put on peaceful people. I don't care your excuse. I don't care your reasons. If one person dies, then it is wrong. End of story. If one person's piece of property is destroyed, it is wrong. It's all wrong. And for anybody to sit here and make excuses and put those two incidences side by side and say one's more justified than the other, I think we're not using a moral compass at all in this country as individuals, much less the collective mindset.
Jacob, we have to move to Rocco. Your last minute, Rocco, I'm going to give you the final point. How do you respond to Sydney and Jacob?
I guess that I would just respond by saying that the point about domestic terrorism, when you actually look up the definition of terrorism, it is the execution of violence in pursuit of a political goal. And what we saw with the Black Lives Matter riots were people who had a grievance which was to varying degrees legitimate. Police brutality does happen in America. And, while I think that some of the incidences were justified self-defense, others were bad, this is to a varying degree a legitimate grievance. But having a legitimate grievance does not mean that you can then take it out on innocent third parties. And, really the point that Jacob made about equating private property with public property and actually saying that public property is the worst thing to harm, that's the opposite of correct. Private property is what's worse to harm because you have no ownership in that private property. You're having your tax money taken from you in order to pay for the public property. So you have some right of ownership to it. And that's not to justify storming the Capitol, but it is to say that what happened in these cities like Minneapolis, several hundred buildings burned to the ground, 24 people killed over the course of several months in these riots. It was a massive display of terrorism, and the media didn't play it up that way. Kamala Harris's advisors put bail funds for the people who participated in it, and that shows you the toxic double standard that we have in this country. And if we're going to talk about unity and about Joe Biden being a unifying president and about moving past the divisiveness of the Trump era, stop treating people like terrorists. Stop treating libertarians like terrorists. Stop treating people who believe in QAnon like terrorists.
Well, Rocco, I'm not to cut you off there, but I want to get more out of your point. Just like I said with Sydney, I mean, at the end of the day, we're here for positive conversation. We're here for the audience to really understand what your point is. So, from those points, I mean, this had all come up under the Trump presidency. Is he responsible? Is this what he left us with massive division? Or does he have accomplishments that are further merited? But it doesn't look like that in the media right now. I know we're going to get to it, but is that what he left us with?
The Trump presidency didn't leave us with massive division. The Trump presidency exposed massive division. There's a big difference between those things. And what it exposed is that there are people in this country, in the establishments of both parties, though to be frank, more in the establishment of the Democratic Party, in my experience, who are willing to do really terrible things in order to maintain their power. The Russia collusion hoax, the Ukraine hoax, you saw all of these things go on to delegitimize our president over the past 4 years, the national security state being used in a brazenly political fashion, and the end result of that being that now we're supposed to say that the opposite side is somehow equal to that because a few dozen people lost their tempers, started hitting police officers, which they should be arrested for, absolutely. But because a few dozen people did that, it equates to months worth of rioting and all of this establishment messing around.
Okay. Well, I appreciate all of our guests for coming on today. If you, the audience, got something out of it, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, share us on social media, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Take care, guys. Bye.